Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the AME Food Testing Show. Today's guest is Dr. John Ryan, the owner of RyanSystems.com and SanitaryColdChain.com, food safety, traceability system, and design. Dr. John Ryan's topic for today is protecting food processors from poor transport practices. Dr. John Ryan recently retired as the administrator for the Hawaii State Department of Agriculture's Quality Assurance Division. He has spent over 25 years implementing high-technology quality control systems for international corporations, and he specializes in food traceability and food safety systems. He architects and supplies sensor-enabled traceability and food safety solutions for products requiring temperature, bio-contaminant, GPS, and explosives measurement and reporting. His primary services are focused on the cold chain and assuring that foods are traceable and delivered in sanitary containers. He also works on delivery controls for the safe import and export of international food shipments. I'd now like you to welcome to our show, the AMA Food Testing Show, Dr. John Ryan. John?
Yes, good morning, Andy.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction.
Would you like to add any other further recent developments in your projects?
Well, the sanitary cold chain really is focused on establishing standards for containers carrying food, and that could be a truck or a bin or airline containers, anything that's moving food from one place to the other. So with regard to that, we have developed our initial set of standards, and we're now looking for help, and that help, it comes in the form of HACCP-trained auditors. In other words, our program is HACCP-based, and so we're looking around the U.S. We have a number of applicants so far, but we're constantly looking for regional assistance in that area. So that's one area. And then if there are any experts out there interested in helping further refine standards for transporters, that would help food processors and restaurants and like that, we'd like to hear from them, because I'll be happy to send them a copy of our standards and gather input. So thank you for that.
Outstanding. That's an excellent introduction into our topic. What is the food production cold chain?
Well, basically, food moving from place to place that is of a perishable nature and subject, because of its perishability, to adulteration for a lack of temperature control, as an example, or could potentially be recalled because of adulteration, or stopped by the FDA because of one of their audits. That's what we'll call the cold chain, and that just includes just about everything coming off of farms, produce, meats, seafood coming out of the oceans and the lakes, and that those shipments, obviously are going from truck to train to whatever. And at this particular point in time, there are very limited guidelines that developed by the FDA and USDA to help to guide the people that are actually holding the food in the trucks and in the trains. And so all of that impacts what we call the food production cold chain. Eventually it's going to get into some production process, and what we're after is trying to protect it from being spoiled or contaminated.
So the eventual objective of these measurable precautions is to maintain the food safety of the products. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The food safety is paramount, right?
Well, how do food producers send their products to market normally?
Well, if you look at a typical farm, the farm is going to use bins, often stacked in the field, to harvest, and then those bins are going to move into a packing house or potentially onto a truck, and the truck then is going to move the product into distribution. Potentially it'll be trucked again then, either into retail restaurants, it could go air freight, or it could go into other distribution channels. So when we talk about all of that movement and moving to market, food is, it goes in a lot of different directions, and there's not always very good control over that. The new Food Safety Modernization Act certainly calls for better controls in the distribution centers, in storage and in handling, but the whole in all of this really is in the actual transportation operations, and that is, when it's on a truck, when it's in a bin, etc.
Well, you raise an excellent point, Dr. Ryan. Anybody who's driven on any of the highways in the United States knows that there are a number of trucks. We don't know what they're filled with, and we don't know really the standards that are being applied. What are the current practices of food transporters?
Well, it depends. Again, there are guidelines, but there are no real standards. That's what we're working on. Current practices, generally speaking, include refrigeration, okay, and that's probably pretty much the upper limit. And even if we call them reefers, right? So you'll see trucks going down the road, and if you look at the front end of that truck, you'll see a bulge sticking out, and that bulge, on that container really is the refrigeration unit. And you've read and I've read of instances where the police or some other enforcement organization has stopped trucks and found out that the refrigeration unit has either failed or been intentionally turned off. And usually truck driver may do that in order to save gas, right? So with gas prices the way they are today, that interrupts what the shipper and the receiver of the food expect to have happen as a common practice. That is, that food is kept under temperature control. Other places where we see disruptions, and we've done a lot of measuring of food moving through transportation, the temperature control tends to get significantly disrupted at loading and unloading operations. It's not infrequent for a load of well-preserved, well-packaged produce to be unloaded from a truck and to sit on a tarmac, as an example, at the airport for an hour or two. The plane's late, whatever, the truck's got to go. Now, all of the work done to protect and preserve that food that's been handled so well, kind of goes down the tube, since that food's now sitting out in the sunlight. And of course, when food sits in the sunlight, let's take a bag of spinach as a good example. That bag of spinach has a certain amount of bacteria in it. There's no way to get rid of it all. And once you start heating it up in that warm, enclosed, humid environment of that bag, that bacteria can proliferate. And when it gets to a high enough level, that's what makes people sick. So that step in there, in between loading and unloading, is a critical one. So we've got two things here, maintaining the temperatures actually when it's moving, and then at transition points between either the truck and the plane, or one truck and another truck, or in some cases, trucks are unloaded or planes are unloaded prior to going into a distribution center, which is temperature controlled, and the temperatures get disrupted there. So current practices for good food transporters and good suppliers and their customers tend to specify good temperature controls, and whether or not all that is maintained is up in the air, and that's what we're about, and that is trying to find out and assure that not only is the food transported in a sanitary vehicle, which I haven't really talked about yet, but that we know where it came from and we know the temperatures were maintained during the transportation and handling processes.
Well, Dr. Ryan, you raised an interesting question when you said sanitary vehicle. What measures can be engaged to protect food during transportation?
Well, that you would expect that there would be some fairly decent packaging, and that is that if the food is loaded into the vehicle in a raw state, or as you see, let's just take pallets of tomatoes as an example, they're pretty much open to the air. They're in cardboard boxes we call cases, but they're usually, like I said, fairly exposed to the environment of the truck itself. So there's a couple of issues here. One is the truck even clean? I mean, in most cases, if you look inside of that carrier, you're going to see that it has not been washed. And if you go to a truck washing station, as an example, they want them to look pretty on the outside, but they're not that concerned about the inside, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon. I've talked to a number of companies that make the truck washing equipment, and when I start talking about internal, how do you keep the truck clean inside, they get a blank look on their faces, so they haven't addressed it, right? A high-pressure spray may be followed by a high-temperature, high-pressure spray, and potentially even using a decontaminant or an antibacterial solution to make sure that the truck is clean. It depends on what the truck is going to carry, right? So that's one end, just that internal cleaning of the truck. Usually you would like to follow that cleaning up with a couple of swab tests, what we call ATP, which is a quick test just to see if there are food residues left within the truck. So you get two phases there. First phase, let's clean it on the inside, and then let's do a couple swabs to see if we've maintained that cleanliness. Now, that's a standard kind of procedures that can be followed. Usually, it's going to be hand sprayed at this time. High-pressure sprayers, like you see washing your houses or whatever, are the currently available types of equipment. One problem is that most truck wash stations don't have that capability. Now let's talk now about the reefer and the air conditioning, the cold air moving around in there. It doesn't do any good for a reefer to have dirty filters and to continually move dirty air around. So you've got those two aspects of potential control that definitely need to be improved, within the environment of that container.
Well, Dr. Ryan, you raised some excellent points. As a matter of fact, I'd like to add a couple more. One are insects. I have actually looked inside some of these transport containers and seen flies. I've seen different types of insect spiders, and also the potentiality for rodents. I actually carry a black light or a UV flashlight, and I walk around the inside of the containers, and I've actually found residue of both urine and feces of different types of rodents. So what other measures can these food transporters engage in to assure food safety?
Well, I think that's good. If you know that those types of checks and measures and inspections are typically required in the distribution centers, et cetera, for food safety certification, that exactly what you just described is certainly going to become a standard in the transportation industry as well. And you're right. The fact that it's not a requirement is not really an excuse for companies not to step up their sanitation and traceability practices. The technology available today to put a unit in the truck that measures the temperature and transmits that temperature in the truck location real time to the shipper as well as the truck company. It's not that expensive. I mean, for $35 a month, you can put those units in along with the tags, and you can have temperatures measured and the truck location found, and all that going on at the same time. So now you've got a clean and traceable unit. And the one part I didn't mention that I should mention is that when the trucks are carrying food, according to the law today, they're not allowed to carry anything else. So that gets to be violated during what we call backhauling quite a bit. In other words, a truck carries food in one direction. The driver or the company cannot find a load of comparable product to bring back to the home of the truck, so they may load concrete blocks or something else in there. That kind of goes along with why do pests, why all this other kind of residue get in there, and how to protect against it. One of the issues, certainly in addition to the clean sanitation, is just simply the truck driver himself. It's his responsibility, it's his vehicle, it's his authority, because that truck is his own, to go in there and look at what the condition of the truck is. Anything coming off a farm, and food in particular, there's no way you're going to keep all the bugs out of it. So trying to do some preventive measures at the packing house or the distribution center in terms of making sure that the produce, as if it's produce, is clean to start with, is the primary responsibility, I think, of it could be the farm if they have their own packing house, or the packing house itself. So, it's what we call it the supply chain, and the responsibility of each step in that supply chain to assure that things are done properly at their location.
John, you raised some excellent points. I'd like to raise one issue that a cantaloupe producer mentioned to me this week. He said, Andy, we go through all the trouble of producing our product. It's in a safe container. We put it on the truck, and for whatever reason, the product falls out of the container inside the truck. Then it's repackaged by the truck driver, who doesn't wash his hands, who doesn't take the normal, what we call good manufacturing practices into consideration, and just bundles it back up and then delivers it at our clients. And what kind of dilemma would that be for our cold chain management?
Well, that probably doesn't happen very often. But again, that's why I say, I'm not pointing fingers at truck drivers in particular, but they haven't been trained. There hasn't, again, the standards are lacking at a national level or state levels even. And they have not been trained, and many of them, something gets thrown on the back of their truck, a container or a trailer. They're not knowledgeable enough about food safety practices, et cetera, that need to be followed. And again, going back to what we do in terms of certification, is we train and certify the truck drivers, the wash stations, the companies that own the trucks. So there's multiple levels of certification available for the people in those processes. They definitely need a training component. There has to be standards, and the company has to take responsibility and say, okay, this is an issue. We're talking trucking here. The same thing goes on with rail as well as air and any other way of moving food. But if that's their business, then they need to take that part of their business reasonably seriously in order to protect their customers and protect the public. And again, up until this point in history, they've been it's been kind of loosey-goosey. Some of them are going to do it. Some of them are going to get away without doing it for the next 10 years. But the good quality, highly more sophisticated companies that are after market share, et cetera, and have to deal with the Costcos of the world, et cetera, the pressure's coming on them to reduce their liability exposure. And that's another issue. I mean, insurance companies are tending nowadays to reduce the insurance costs for transporters who have good control systems in place. And the same goes with food safety. So if a farm is a food safety certified farm and they need liability insurance, product liability insurance, there are companies now that are reducing the cost of their insurance. So there's some cost benefit to the food safety issues, not to mention the fact that you're reducing your own risk in terms of being sued, or getting involved in a recall or losing a whole load. I talked to one trucker in Washington State who was quite upset. He had good temperature controls in his truck. The customer received the load, and they didn't want to pay him $10,000 worth of produce, right? And he said, wait a minute, I had temperature controls. They ended up in court. And the judge basically said, you had temperature controls, but you're responsible for that load because you took responsibility of it when it got loaded in your truck. And what that meant was he didn't know the temperature of the load when he put it in his truck. It was probably too hot, okay? And even though it was in his truck for, maybe a day even, he got the temperature down and he showed he had control, but the judge said, no, you're paying for it. You were responsible for it. So that vicarious liability and that risk that he assumed when he did not know the temperature of the load when it went in his truck, that cost him a lot of money. He is not happy about that. And I think that's the way things are going. So the insurance companies are rolling around and saying, if you get control and if you have sanitation and if you can track, the produce, then we're going to reduce your insurance because you're a more responsible, lower risk player in the supply chain. So that's the bottom line on it. And that kind of goes for not just the transporters, but that kind of goes for everybody nowadays. I know there's a lot of companies in the U.S. Sitting on the fence waiting for the administrative rules that are coming out of the Food Safety Modernization Act to give them more guidance. And I'm sorry the feds have not, stayed on track time-wise with that guidance. And that's why we're stepping it up, and saying, hey, we can establish standards and we can help you start to train your people. We can help you start to learn sanitation. We can help you start to do the record keeping that's required to protect yourself during recalls or even prevent some of these problems from happening and becoming your own responsibility and expense.
Well, John, you raise a number of very critical points. First, the food producer, the food transporter, the liability insurer, and ultimately the consumer, and, of course, lawyers who protect those interests both ways. What products and services does your firm offer to support these various interests?
Well, we've got two sides to it. The primary thing we're working on now is helping to establish the standards for the movement of the goods. In other words, what's a standard for a container? How clean? How do you know it's clean? How do you maintain its cleanliness? And then how do you know where it's been, what it's doing? This combination of sanitation and traceability certification is basically required nowadays by the new Food Safety Modernization Act requirements for record keeping. So any container that holds food has to have a unique identification number. It has to be clean, and it has to be traceable, and that data all has to go together. What we're doing in that regard, number one, helping to certify, establish the programs that certify and maintain as part of the business practices good control over the delivery processes. So that's number one. Number two, we do a lot of work on the Ryan Systems side, testing of different types of equipment to make sure that depending on the transporter's requirements, cost structures, as well as the format and the movement, etc., that the traceability component can fit into their business needs. And so there's a number of different models. There's RFID. There's what we call ILC, identification, location, and condition. And these devices, this technology, can sense and can report the location, the GPS, as well as the condition of the goods as they're being moved. So if you match those up, you've got, on one hand, training and certification with regard to maintaining a good control system, but on the other hand, we have the technology to back that up to help people with it. We've also developed, because I think I mentioned it, a lack of interior truck washing and sanitation capabilities around the U.S. One of my associates in the Salinas area has developed a transportable, a mobile unit that can go wherever the truck is and do the sanitation on site. So, we're looking for solutions all the time. We're looking to, again, help companies get certified, help the individuals get certified to wash or put track systems in. We're trying to help the wash stations get certified so that they are doing a good job when they actually do the sanitation and put traceability in. And we're also, looking at the requirements for the shippers themselves. Let's say Costco owns 1,000 trucks. They probably own 10,000 for all I know. But those trucks need to be put into a system that maintains, and there's inspection, there's cleaning, there's record keeping, et cetera, et cetera. That's all part of the the new requirements, and everybody has to step it up in that regard. So those two areas are critical to our business, and that's what we're trying to do to help others.
Outstanding. Could you repeat your offer again and your interest in receiving solicitations to be trained and certified as auditors?
Okay. We are looking for HACCP trained auditors, and those auditors that's a minimum requirement for our certification processes. So if you go to sanitarycoldchain.com, you will see a form on that website that you can fill out very quickly, and I'll get back to you. At least for now, I'll put you in my database, and we need to know where you are. We need to know who you're working with. We need to know if we can depend on you. So when we have a requirement for you to step it up and get into a company in your location, I got a couple this morning, one from Kentucky, another one from Washington, and so I get them every day, and we need to know where you are, and we'd love to hear from you. Yes, you get paid for that. And the second part of that is that if there are companies out there that would like to provide input to our standards, we'd love to share them with you and listen to your concerns. Okay, we're young at this, so we know we have a good background and history in what we do, but we surely cannot solve everybody's problems. So we'd like to hear more. So if there's anybody who would like to have input into the review process, that's ongoing, right? Those standards are living documents, and we expect that we will take things out and put things in as time goes on. So we'd like to hear from you, too.
Well, John, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. I'd like to extend to you my appreciation, and also I'm sure if they could contribute, all of the food production, food quality, food safety, and food security managers that do on a frequent basis listen to the show. I'd like to allow you some closing comments, and then we'll conclude our interview.
All right, thanks, Andy. Again, we have a couple websites you can take a look at. Sanitarycoldchain.com. You can get there by typing in transcert, TRANSCERT.com. And you can also take a look at our hardware, software support side, ryansystems.com, or cleantrans, KLEENTRANS.com. So, again, both the traceability and the sanitation are primary concerns for us, and we can help you through that process. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and have a great day, and look forward to chatting with you in the future as we get more regulations that are formalized in the Food Safety Modernization Act. Thank you, Dr. Ryan.
All right, thank you.
Bye now.